This cardigan is epic and I am so excited to make it with you today. The Shades of Diamonds is a fun one. We're going to do those easy granny crochet stitches, but we're going to add in a little bit of color work to give it that extra pop. Now this cardigan can be modified and I will talk about that throughout the construction if you want to change a few things about it, but we're going to get started by talking about the supplies today. Today I'm going to be using the 2 of Wands Color Theory yarn. This is from Lion Brand. Now it is labeled a 4 medium worsted yarn, but whenever I do a gauge swatch with this yarn and I compare it to other yarns for substitutions, I find that DK weights are more similar to this yarn than other worsted labeled yarns. So just be conscious of that as you start to work this up. One of the substitutions I have used is from Mary Maxim, and that is that Mellow Spun along with that Prism yarn that is really fun to do as well. I today will be using 3 different colors plus a main color. So we've got our main color A, and then we have these other 3 colors that we'll be working to do that color work. So the main color is this Moonbeam, and then I've also got the Tourmaline, the Canyon, what is this one? Yeah, the Canyon, and this one is the Himalayan Salt. These are a really fun combination, but once again, there are a lot of combinations you can use, and I'll put some color inspiration into that ad-free PDF. Now today you will need a size 5mm crochet hook, a tapestry needle for weaving in those ends, scissors for cutting them. Stitch markers are never a bad idea, especially when working in rows to mark the ends of the rows. And then a tape measure. A tape measure can be a really nice tool to have to make sure that you're not only staying on track, but if you want to measure your body to make any adjustments as well. Let's go ahead and get started by talking about the construction for this garment. We're going to be starting with our color A today, and this is the main color of this cardigan, and we're going to start by working this garment from bottom up. So we'll start with the bottom ribbing, and then we'll work and build upon that, working through some of the color work up to underneath the arms, and then we'll have this very big long piece that we are going to work the front panels from. So the main body of this will be in one piece, and then we'll be making the sleeves. And we're going to do those in the round to have less ends to weave in. And then we will add an optional hood, or you can go straight to the front trim if you don't want to do the hood. There's a few customization options for this that are going to be really fun. And of course, pockets are also a fun detail as well. I will say that if you're doing a gauge swatch, it's not a bad idea to just make a pocket and see what that is, because you'll use it later if you've got that gauge just right. Now, as you get started with any garment, it is always a wise choice to make a gauge swatch. I never recommend skipping that. That way you know if you need to adjust your hook size, or you might need to adjust what's called the golden loop. And I have a blog post about gauge and all the good stuff about how to fix your gauge if it's not right. But we're going to talk about a quick way for this pattern to do your gauge, and that is with a pocket. Since we're making pockets for this design, you can do a gauge swatch by following those pocket instructions. It gives you the opportunity to try out a little bit of color work, and then when you're done with your gauge swatch, you'll have a pocket, which is fantastic. And then when you go to measure your gauge, the pocket, you always want the swatch you're working with to be slightly larger than 4 by 4 inches, because we're measuring 4 by 4 inches. And so the pocket does that for us. And when we go to measure, we want to make sure that we have our, let's see, it was 8 rows. And this is also by 15 stitches. So then we have 15 stitches there. So once you know that you are set, that gauge swatch, if you need to do it again, that's fine. But whenever you're done with the gauge swatch, if you make the pocket, part of the pattern is done. So it's a little bit of a bonus. So I'm going to start by showing how to create one of these pockets. Now, when you've slip stitched all the way around and you're back to the beginning, we're set up to now add our ribbing on top of the pocket. If you like the height of this and you don't want to add the ribbing, that's fine. But I'm going to add just a little bit of ribbing. And to do so, we're going to start by chaining 5. We're going to go right into that ribbing. So we'll chain 5. The end chain is our turning chain. And after chaining 5, we're going to tighten down that last chain a little bit, and we're going to single crochet in the remaining 4 chains. So we're going to start in the second chain from the hook and we will single crochet 4. So the ribbing height of this will only be 4 stitches. And this is a join as you go style ribbing. Now once we have worked those 4 single crochets, we're going to work into the back loop only of the next 2 stitches doing slip stitches. This is a join as you go ribbing, and those slip stitches are what help us join the ribbing to the edge of that. Then we're going to turn our work and we're going to skip those 2 slip stitches that we just did, and working in the back loop only, we are going to single crochet 4. Now if you want on the very outer edge, the top, this will be the top of the pocket, you can single crochet through both loops for it to be a little bit cleaner. And then we're going to turn our work and working through the back loops only. Once again, chain 1. If you want to do this very first edge stitch through both loops, you can, but working through the back loops only, we will single crochet across our stitches. And then we're just going to keep repeating those steps where we go so we slip stitch the next 2 stitches in the back loop only from the top of the pocket, and then we turn our work, and then after turning our work, we're going to skip those 2 slip stitches, and working in the back loop only, we will single crochet across those 4. And we're going to do that all the way across, just repeating those last 2 rows of the top of the pocket to add some ribbing onto the top. Now once you've worked all the way across, you can fasten off your end. You'll actually end at this point on the back, but I fastened off and I wove my tail end up to this left corner on the back side of this, because we'll use this tail end to seam down one side, across the bottom, and up the other side for the pocket onto the cardigan. To get started with the pocket, we are going to create a slip knot and place that onto our hook. And then we will chain 20. Now, if you want to make your pocket wider, you're going to increase the chains in increments of 3 from here, but it will change the chart, so just be aware of that. We're going to start by doing a stacked single crochet into the very first chain from the hook, and I like to work these through that back hump. And to do a stacked single crochet, we're going to start it just as we would a single crochet stitch, but we're going to go back into this left bar here, yarn over and pull up a loop, and yarn over and pull through 2, and it makes a nice straight edge for these, and that is a stacked single crochet. Now it's always a good idea to go ahead and mark the stitch, especially we don't want to work down the side, so I'm going to mark the first stitch of the row. And now we are going to do 2 double crochets into the next chain. And then we will skip 2 chains and 3 double crochet into the next. And that's going to be a repeat across until the last 3 stitches. We will skip 2 and 3 double crochet into the next. And now that we are to the last 3 chains of this row, we will simply double crochet into the very last chain. And now we will turn our work. And we're going to do row 2, and row 2 is our repeat row. So we will start by doing a stacked single crochet into the very first stitch. And then in that very first space, we are going to do 2 double crochets. So for the Granny Stitch look, we end up crocheting between the granny groups, and every 3 double crochet in the same stitch is a granny group. So now we're going to work into the next space and do 3 double crochets. And then we'll do that again, and we'll do that all the way across. We'll work in each space between those granny groups, creating 3 double crochets, so creating another granny group, and we'll work that all the way across until the last 3 stitches. Now when we get to the last 3 stitches, we will skip 2 and do a double crochet into the last, which is our marked stitch. And that is row 2. And row 2, we're just going to simply keep repeating until we get a total of 7 rows. Now I'm on that last stitch of row 7, and whenever you're changing colors for color work, you're going to stop before your very last yarn over, and with that yarn over, we're going to pull in the new color that we will be working with. So for this, it'll be our color B. We'll simply yarn over with that new color, and now we're ready to start with that new color on the next row. Now for this, you can go ahead and fasten off color A. Now we're going to be working 2 colors across this row. We're going to be working color B and color C. We're going to start our very first stitch with our color B. We're going to start by doing a stacked single crochet into the very first. And then working in that very first space, we'll do 2 double crochet stitches. And then we're going to be changing to our color C for the next space. So once again, stop before your last yarn over and go ahead and yarn over with the color C. Now this right now, we have the right side facing, so we're going to be carrying all of our yarn on the back side of our work when we do switch between colors. And now we're going to change back to our color B. And we're going to keep alternating between color B and color C. And now that we are to the last 3 stitches of the row with our color B, we are going to double crochet into that last. But we are switching to our color C for the next row. So this is what the row 8 looks like. And now that this row is complete, we can go ahead and fasten off our color B. We're going to turn our work, and for row 9, we're going to work in pattern with our color C. We're not going to use any other color but our color C for this row. Now when we're working across, we want to make sure that the floats on the back, the carried yarn, we are going to work into that space, making sure that we go under all of those floats. That kind of pulls them into place and makes sure that it opens up that space as it should look. Now I've completed the row 9. We're going to go ahead and turn our work, and for row 10 we will be working 2 colors again, but we're starting this row with our color C. So we're going to start with a stacked single crochet and then 2 double crochets into that first space. And then we're going to be switching to our color D. And now we're going to be switching our colors every other space across. And now that we are to the last 3 stitches of the row, we will switch back to our color C and double crochet into that last stitch. And we are going to be fastening off our color D. And now for row 11, we are repeating row 9, which is just working the color C in each stitch across in pattern. And now we are at row 12. This is still row 11. I'm still on this side because we want to go ahead and grab our color B and change colors, setting ourselves up for row 12. And this will be our last row of color work. So we're going to start the row by doing a stacked single crochet in the first. And this is just a repeat of row 8. So you've done this before when we first started doing this color work. It's the same pattern. So we're just going to work row 12 the same way as we did row 8, and then I'll come on back. Now at the end of this row, we can go ahead and grab our color A because we're ready to go back to that color for this final row and to do a little bit of slip stitching to make the edges look nice. And we can go ahead and fasten off our color B and C. Now for our final row, we're just going to work in pattern in the color A all the way across. Now after working our last row, we will turn and we will be slip stitching around the edges. It makes it look so much nicer when we do those slip stitches and then block it. But before we can do that, we obviously need to take care of these ends. So at this point, don't fasten off color A, just let it sit. Maybe throw a stitch marker in here so that that stitch can't go anywhere. And we are going to grab our yarn needle and we're going to weave in all of these tail ends. Now that we have all of our ends woven in and we have the right side facing us, so we finished this last row and then we turned. And now we're going to do some slip stitching around. It's a good idea to chain one to start. And now we're simply going to slip stitch one slip stitch per stitch on this top part and across the bottom part where there are chains. But when we work along the sides, we'll want to do about 2 slip stitches per row. Now whenever we get to a corner, we'll want to chain one, and you can tighten that down, and then work in the same space to begin working along the edge. And like I said, I'll do about 2 slip stitches per row along this edge. And sometimes I just catch one strand along the edge. Sometimes it's easier to go through a little bit more, but we just want this evened out a little bit so that it looks nice when we go to stitch it to our cardigan. So you'll keep working that all the way around, and then it's always a good idea to block it. It loosens it up a little bit. I find after blocking, sometimes it's a little bit softer if you're blocking with steam or water. This one I blocked with steam because sometimes your tension might change as you're crocheting. So you just want to block everything in the cardigan to dimension, and it really makes it look nice and even. And you can see like this even has a slight width difference that blocking will help with to make sure that I've got the correct gauge. Let's go ahead and jump in with that bottom ribbing. Now this ribbing is going to be worked in rows. We're going to make a slip knot and place that onto our hook. Next, we are going to chain 10. After chaining 10, I sometimes like to tighten down that turning chain. We are going to work single crochet stitches in all these chains across. So starting in the second chain from the hook, and I do like to work into those back humps, we are going to single crochet and then single crochet in the remaining chains, which means for row 1 of this bottom ribbing, we will have a total of 9 stitches. Now, if you would like a thicker or thinner trim of the ribbing along the bottom of the cardigan, you will chain either more or less chains to start to adjust that thickness of this ribbing. Now, after completing row 1, we are going to turn our work, chain 1, and this is a turning chain, so this does not count as a stitch. And then working in the back loops only, we are going to single crochet 9 stitches across. But if you want your first and your last stitch to be sharper on the edges, you'll single crochet through both loops of the first and the last stitch of each row. And then the rest of them will be in the back loop only. So we're not going through the front loop. We're not going through the whole stitch. We're only going through that back loop only across. And now after completing row 2, we are going to be repeating that until we have as many rows as indicated in the pattern for the size that we will be working. So that's turning, chaining 1, you work through both loops for the first stitch if you want, and then single crochet in the back loop only until the last stitch, and work through both loops of the last stitch of each row. And this is a very relaxing, repetitive stitch to do. So this is a great opportunity when you're starting out and doing all this ribbing to watch a show or listen to an audiobook. Now for the size small, I have a total of 152 rows for this very long ribbing. This is going to go along the bottom of the cardigan. The row count will be different depending on what size you are making. Today on camera, I'm making size small, but all that information is in the PDF pattern or when it hits the blog. Now our next steps are going to be to slip stitch across this long edge of this ribbing. We're just going to even it out. It'll be a nice transition by doing it this way. So I'm going to chain one, and this is not going to count as a stitch. And then I'm going to slip stitch one stitch along each row edge. And I like to mark the first stitch in a row just to make sure I know what my stitch count is when I'm counting stitches. It's easy to identify that first stitch and not mistake your chain one or something as a stitch. So now I'm going to continue to slip stitch along this edge. And once again, we're doing one slip stitch per row. I will have 152 slip stitches at the end of this row that we're doing here. So one slip stitch per row edge, and this will be 151 stitches for the size small. We're going to do that all the way across. Now that we have done our slip stitches across that long edge, we are going to turn our work. And for this next row, this is going to be row 1. This will be the first row working from the color chart. Even though we are going to be continuing to work in our color A, this one is also mapped out on an individual color chart page in the PDF pattern. I've also included a color chart in the PDF pattern to follow along. Now there are 3 different ones of those in the pattern depending on what size you're working on. So each one will be a little bit different. So it depends on what size you're doing to what color chart and instructions you will work from. Once again, I'm doing the size small, so we're going to work from that chart and instructions. Now the row 1, this row we're going to do right now is on our wrong side row, which means as we do this row, we have the wrong side of our work facing us, which is important when it comes to doing Granny Stitch Colorwork. This row is also going to be worked into the front loop only. The reason why I like to do that is I like having that line of the back loop remain in place on the right side. But if you want to work through both loops, that's fine too. It's just personal preference. So for the very first stitch in this row, I'm going to insert my hook. Notice I have not chained. And I'm going to go into that front loop only. And then I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. And then we're going to go back through that left bar, yarn over and pull up a loop, and yarn over and pull through 2 again. And that's called a stacked single crochet. And that's the first stitch of our row. It's always wise to mark these so that you don't work around the edges of them, but it makes a nice crisp edge when we work it that way. Now we are going to do 2 double crochets into the next stitch in that front loop only. And then this is going to be our repeat across until we get to the very last 3 stitches of this row. We're going to skip 2 stitches. I'm turning my work towards us so we can kind of see this better. We're going to skip 2 stitches and do 3 double crochets into the front loop of the next stitch. And that's what we're going to repeat all the way across until we get to the last 3 stitches of this row. We're going to skip 2 stitches and 3 double crochet into the next. And repeat that all the way across your work until the last 3 stitches of this row. And now that we are to the last 3 stitches of the row, we're going to move that stitch marker, skip 2 stitches, and then double crochet into that very last stitch. But we're going to stop before doing our last yarn over for that double crochet, because for this size, when we start our next row, we are starting with our color B. So we'll want to take our color B and use our color B to do that last yarn over, because now we're set up with that color change to start with row 2. We're going to turn our work and then do a new color work repeat. Now for this row, for row 2, we're going to be working 2 colors and we're going to carry our yarn on the back of our work. It won't be seen, it's going to be on the inside of the cardigan, and we'll keep it as neat and tidy as possible. But this is why there is a right side and a wrong side to this color work. And right here is our right side. So when the right side is facing us, we want to hold the yarn that we're carrying to the back of our work. So for this row, we are going to be starting by doing a stacked single crochet into that very first stitch. And it's never a bad idea to mark this. And then into the very first space here, so this very first space between this double crochet we did and the next group of 3 double crochets, we are going to double crochet 2. But remember, every single time we change colors, we want to stop on our previous stitch on the last yarn over, and we want to bring in the new color that we're changing to and yarn over with that new color. Next, we are going to work 3 double crochet stitches into the next 2 spaces. So I'm going to do 3 double crochet stitches into this first space, and then 3 double crochet again into the next space. Now here's where we're going to be floating our yarn on the back or carrying it on the back, because we're going to change back to our color B, but that's quite a long float. I don't worry about it with granny stitches. The main thing is you don't want to pull it too tight along the back of the work that it changes the fabric, that the fabric loses some of that stretch because the float's too tight. But we will be working over this on the next row to get it more in place. So these long floats won't look this long forever. So I have changed to the color B again, and in the next space we are going to double crochet 3. And then we're going to change back to the color A. And we're going to work 3 double crochet groups into each of the next 2 spaces. And this is our repeat. So we're going to do 2 spaces with our 3 double crochets in color A, and then the next space after that will be our color B. So here is where we will change back to our color B, making sure that we aren't pulling this one too tight. It's okay if you leave it a little bit loose on the back, because on the next row we'll be tacking that down even more. And then we'll 3 double crochet into the next space. And then we'll also be changing back to the color A and doing that repeat all the way across. Now I'm going to continue this repeat until I get to the very last 6 stitches of this row. Now that we are to the last 6 stitches of this row, we're going to change back to color A, and in the next space we'll do 3 double crochets. And then in the very last stitch we will double crochet 1. But we are going to be changing to a different color again for the next row of color work that we're going to get set up for. So I'm not going to yarn over there, I'm going to grab the new color. So I can go ahead and bring in the color C, and we've got that set up for row 3, and we can fasten off the color A. Now I'm going to turn my work again, and we are going to start our very first stitch with this color C. And now every single row will start and end the same way. It's the same stitch pattern repeat. So we're going to start by doing a stacked single crochet into this very first stitch, and then in the first space here we are going to do 2 double crochets, but we will be changing our color. So on the very last yarn over we're going to go ahead and stop. So now when we go to yarn over, either pull the whole ball towards you or just a strand. Bring this to the front of your work, and it's going to stay on the front of your work as we change colors. Now in the next space we will do 3 double crochets, and we will also be doing 3 double crochets into this next space. But this is where work underneath any floats. So when you're working into this space, we're going to want to make sure we're working below any of those floats, because that helps clean it up a bit, and it will help maintain a nice stitch structure. And it's less likely that your fingers will catch on the inside if we work over those floated strands. So now that I've worked that, we're going to go back to our color C. And this is our repeat here across until the last 6 stitches are going to be to do the next segment that we're doing. So I'm going to bring the color that I'm working, the color B, to the front of my work and grab the color C, and I'm going to yarn over with that new color and making sure that it's not like pulling the fabric tight. You want this float to stay pretty loose. And then we're going to work the next 3 stitches working over the previous strand that's sitting there. We're going to do 3 double crochets. And now I'm going to bring that color C to the front of my work, and I'm going to pick up the color B, yarn, and do the last yarn over. Sometimes I like to pull at my tail ends to make sure everything's straight and we don't have anything too loose, just a nice small tug. And now in the next 2 spaces, we will be working with the color B, doing 3 double crochets in each space. And then we'll bring back in the color C, and we're going to be repeating that across. So we'll do a set of the color C. So the next space, I'll do 3 double crochets for the color C, and then the next 2 spaces, I'll be doing the color B. And that's the repeat. We'll be working all the way across, keeping our floating yarn on the side that's facing us right now, this wrong side, until I get to the last 6 stitches of this row. Now that we are to the last 6 stitches of the row, we're changing back to our color B, and we'll work in the next space for 3 double crochets. And then in the very last stitch of the row, we will do a double crochet. And we're starting our next row with this color again, so we don't have to change colors, and we can turn our work. This is already looking so nice. I love this style of color work. It's a bunch of fun, and we're still using that easy granny stitch. So for rows 4 through 10, we're going to keep using the skills we just talked about, and we're going to work up that color chart. Now, after this next row, we can fasten off the color B, and then we'll be working with the color D. But at most, we will only ever be working 2 colors in a row. And remember to carry your yarn on the back of the work. So for example, this next row, we would carry it not the side facing us, but the side on the back of our work, the wrong side of our work. Now, after we work this color work portion, then we will simply be working in our main color, our color A, without any color changes, which is a really easy stitch repeat until we get to the point where we will split for the back and the front panels. So I'm going to go ahead and work this up, and we'll talk about adjusting for the length. So now I have created this very large piece that's the bottom of the cardigan. It almost just looks like a blanket at this point, but this is what wraps from underneath our arms all the way around us. And this is where we can do some adjustments in the length. So right now I have about a total of 45 rows. So I have 45 from the ribbing, including that color work. And I currently have the right side row facing me. But for this particular garment, this next step, it's not really going to make a difference whether you have the right or wrong row facing you for this portion, this next section. Now this is where we can adjust the length. If you want to do a really long duster, you're going to add more length to it. If you want to do a crop top, you'll be doing less rows. But also, we are not all the same when it comes to sizing. We have a lot of different heights, very wide range of heights. I am about 5'6", and this is the length that I like, but you may like a different length depending on how tall you are and where you want this to hit on your body for the bottom part of it, like so you can hold it up to yourself as you're creating this and see where you want that length to be. Now at this point, we're going to be taking this very large piece and we're going to be making sections. So we're going to start with this very first panel. This will be a front panel. Then we'll do the back center panel, which will be a little bit wider because it's covering our whole back. And then at the very last panel we'll do is the other front panel. Now once you have the length that you want, we are going to start this the same way as we have started every row, which is a stacked single crochet and then 2 double crochets into that very first space. Now when it comes to working this first panel, we've started this row just like we had every row previous, where we started with a stacked single crochet and 2 double crochets into that first space. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work those granny groups, those 3 double crochets for the next 11 spaces. Then in the next space, we are going to simply double crochet 1, and then we're going to turn our work. So this is row 1 of this first panel. We have a total of 37 stitches for the size small, and we're not going to be working the rest of this row. We're going to turn our work and then work in pattern until we have a total of 18 rows for this panel for the size small. So we're just going to turn our work, leaving the rest of those stitches unworked. We're going to come back and do those later, and we'll start this row just like we have all the previous ones. We'll do a stacked single crochet into that first stitch and then 2 double crochets into that first space. And then we're just going to work this across in pattern, and we'll do that until we have 18 rows, and for the size small it's 37 stitches, so 18 rows, and then we'll be done with that first panel. We can fasten off and we'll come back and work the back panel. So now that I have 18 rows for this size, I can go ahead and fasten off, and you can leave it a long tail if you want for seaming later. Next, we're going to be doing that center back panel. We're going to start by joining our yarn into that space next to the last space worked on the first panel. So we're just going to go to that next space next to that first panel. And you can either join with a slip stitch, or you can go ahead and place a slip knot onto your hook and then go right into that stacked single crochet into that very first space. And then we're going to do 2 double crochets into that same space. So we worked our very first granny cluster. And now we are going to work 3 double crochet stitches into each of the next 23 spaces. For the size small, I started with that stacked single crochet and 2 double crochets into that very first space. And then I continued 23 more groups of those 3 double crochets. I have a total of 24 granny clusters so far. And now we're simply going to do a double crochet into the next space and turn. And once again, this is what we're going to work for the back panel, and we'll do that for a total of 18 rows, and then we'll come on back. So now that we have 18 rows on the back center panel, which matches the height of this first panel, we are going to do our last panel, which means we're going to fasten off our yarn from that center panel. And then we're going to come over here and do the attachment again. So once again, if you want to do a slip stitch, you can, or you can do a slip knot and place that on your hook, and you can go right into that stacked single crochet. So we are going to go to this space right next to the last space worked on that center panel, and we're going to start with a stacked single crochet and then do 2 more double crochets into that same space, and then we're just going to work in pattern all the way across to the end of this row. And then once again, we're going to continue to work in pattern for 18 total rows, which creates this last front panel. Now, once you have completed that final panel, you can fasten off and leave a tail for seaming if you would like. And then after this, it's time for us to seam at the shoulders for the center body piece. Now, there are 2 ways you can do this. For the written pattern, the way that I've created this design, it is for a hood, But if you do not want a hood, that's okay. We're going to do the seaming a little bit different, so I'm going to talk about that. Now here's the part where we are going to be seaming the shoulder. So I have this when I laid it flat, when you've got your 3 panels and then you fold them in, you're going to match up the front panels to the back panels, and this is where we have a decision to make. And that is, are you going to do a hood or no hood? If we are not doing a hood, we are simply going to seam all the way along, attaching the front panels to the back panels, starting at the outer edges, lining up stitch per stitch and seaming it. And then we'll move on to the front, edging the front ribbing. However, if you want a hood, we're going to seam a little bit differently to leave room for a hood. What we're going to do if you're doing a hood is you're going to mark the last 5 inches. So this is where you want to grab your tape measure. For any size, we are going to do the last 5 inches. And that is approximately about 5 granny groups. And then it has like that 1 extra space for the double crochet. And on the other side, it'll be a little bit different in terms of the granny groups, because on this side it's about 6 granny groups because of the way that this first space works out. So we're going to mark off the 5 inches on each side, and we are only going to seam from the outer edge of the shoulder to that stitch marker, and same on the other side. And that way we're leaving this space available for us to start a hood. So I am going to grab my wherever it went, my tapestry needle that was just here and I lost, and I'm going to be seaming from the outside in. Found it. So we're just going to start from one edge. You can weave in your end to begin with. That way you don't have to come back and weave in the end later. So I'm just going to weave in my end on one of these sides, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to seam the shoulder seam. Now, when it comes to seaming a shoulder seam, you can use several different methods, but the one I'm going to use is almost like an invisible stitch. So I'm going to come up the center of my first side of the very first stitch, and then I'm going to go down the center of the stitch on the other side. So when we're looking at the top of our stitches, when we have all these V's here, we want to go down the center of those V's when you're looking at the top of the stitches. And then I'm going to come back up through the center of the V on the back side, and then through the center of the V on this side. And sometimes I catch that other third loop is what is often called, to just reinforce that edge. And so I'm just going to keep going back and forth, going down and up the center of these stitches. And then as you pull those, you can see it just creates a nice seam along the top. The other way you can do this is you can use your crochet hook and you can slip stitch these together. It's really personal preference. We just need to seam until we get to that marked point. So now that we have our seams and we have this opening on the front, we can go ahead and start the hood. Now remember, the hood will also have an added trim on the front, which will also add to the depth of it. But as we work this back and forth in rows, if you want to along the back, you can do some increases if you want a wider hood along the back of the neckline, but that's a customization that's completely up to you. Now to start working in rows across here, we're going to go ahead to this corner. We're going to join our yarn, or you can go ahead, you can join with a slip knot, or you can create a slip knot, place that onto your hook, and start along this edge in the very first stitch with a stacked single crochet. And then we're going to work in pattern. We're going to do 2 double crochets into that first space. And we're going to work those granny groups all the way across. Now, as you get to the point where we are going from the front panels to the back panels, here's an opportunity to either add or continue to work in pattern for this space. So on this edge, if you wanted to have a little bit of a bigger hood, like with a little bit more width, you can just go into a space anywhere in between these 2 spaces or whatever space comes next, and you can add 3 double crochets, and that's just going to add a little bit more fabric along that seam to help it kind of lay and have a bit more depth to it, and then go to the next space and keep working in pattern. And now I'm going to work across all the stitches along the back until I get to the other seam. So now as I get to this other seam after working across the back behind the neck, I do want to, just because I think it is a little bit helpful, before I go from here to here, just take this opportunity to just find a space in between and add one more granny group to give that hood a little bit more width. You don't have to, I just really do like a hood that has a decent amount of drape, and that's my opportunity to do so. Now, if you want to increase more, I have included in the Add Free pattern a chart and instructions on how to add increases along here if you do want to increase it to a larger hood. So now that I have reached the end of that first row, I have all these stitches to just work back and forth, and we're just going to create a lot of length to this hood. We're just going to keep working back and forth in rows, and once we have worked the length of the hood, and I'll come back and talk about customizing that, when I've got it visually here, it'll be easier to understand, and then we'll talk about how to finish off that hood. So I have worked my hood for a total of 30 rows. And now we just see that we have these armholes and then we have this flap of fabric, but I promise it's going to come together. But at this point, if you want to fold the top of this together and use stitch markers or pin it and then try it on, make sure that you like the depth that you have, the height you have of this hood before you do any seaming. It's really easy to throw it on and check. But this is going to be super cute. I'm so excited to be getting to the finishing point of this. Now what we have next is to seam this top edge. Now I'm just going to grab a yarn needle and I'm just going to seam this the same way that I did the shoulder seams, but you can always grab a crochet hook if you want, and you can do a slip stitch to join these. It's whatever you're most comfortable with however you like to seam and the look of that seam. So I'm simply going to fasten this off and then seam those together starting from this front edge, which makes it really easy because it's going to line it up perfectly when I work my seam one stitch at a time all the way back. So I love when seaming is so easy because we know what we're doing. We're just going to go back and forth through each stitch, joining one stitch per side, and join the top seam, and this is what will create that hood shape that we need for this to look fantastic. So I'm going to work all the way across this, going back and forth all the way to those last stitches, and then I will fasten off and weave in the ends. Now after we have the hood seamed, we have the opening of our cardigan ready for some ribbing, because now that we have the around the hood, we're ready for that. If you omitted the hood, you're still going to work this ribbing the same way. You're just going to work it around the back collar stitches. There'll only be a couple, and then work back down the other side. So what we'll do next is we'll grab the color we're using for our ribbing. If you want to do a contrast color, feel free. I'm going to stick with the main color here, and we're going to join at the bottom left front side of this. So if it's laying flat, you're going to grab this left side on the bottom, and we are going to join with a slip stitch. Now this is into those ribbing stitches from before. Now once we have joined to this bottom corner, we are going to be working some slip stitches. This is going to make the front edge look a lot cleaner and nicer. It's similar to what we did down here. So we're going to start by slip stitching in every single stitch across for the ribbing. And then when we get to these edges, we are going to be working slip stitches across these edges. We're going to be placing about 2 slip stitches per row. Now, if you find that your fabric is puckering, like it's too tight, we don't want that. So you will either want to loosen up your stitches or make sure you're doing 2 stitches per row. Or if you find that it's too many stitches, you can every once in a while do 1 stitch per row to even it out. In the end, we're just doing slip stitches evenly as possible all the way around this opening. So you can see where I've started it here, and we are going to slip stitch all the way around the hood and back down the other side to create a nice edge for us to work into for that ribbing. It also makes working the ribbing a bit easier. I find it's a bit more even when we have already set ourselves up with these slip stitches. Now that we've slip stitched all the way around that opening from this first front left edge all the way around the hood. It's quite a long stretch. I'm down at the bottom right edge, and this is where we are going to start our ribbing. I'm going to do this ribbing a couple stitches less than what we did on the bottom, going around the front, but you can adjust the thickness of the ribbing however you like with these first chains. So we're going to start by chaining 8. Now after chaining 8, we're going to work a single crochet in the second chain from the hook and across all those chains. So this will be a total of 7 single crochet stitches. Now as we get back down to this edge, we're going to be doing what's called a join as you go ribbing, but we're going to slip stitch into the next 2 stitches in the front loop only. So that's the loop closest to you, and we're leaving the back loops unworked, and that's what gives us that nice line along there that we will see on the front. Then we're going to turn our work. We're going to skip those 2 slip stitches and working in the back loop only, single crochet 7. Now on this very last stitch of the outer edge, if you want to single crochet through both loops, you can. It kind of makes a little bit of a straighter edge. Then I'm going to turn, and I've already chained 1, so we turn and we chain 1, and once again we're going to work across these stitches. And like I said, if you want to work the first one through both loops, feel free, but working in the back loop only to create that ribbing, we're going to single crochet across. And the ribbing will always remain at 7 stitches. And once we single crocheted across those stitches, we are going to slip stitch into the next 2 stitches. We're doing that in the front loop only. And then we will turn our work, skip those 2 slip stitches, and in the back loop only, single crochet 7. And that's what we are going to repeat. We're going to repeat those 2 rows, working the ribbing all the way around the front of the cardigan. Now our next step is to make the sleeves. I've already created one here, and I'm going to walk you through the steps of the next one. Now this is a tapered sleeve. If you prefer not to have a tapered sleeve, I do have adjustments for that in the written pattern on Etsy, but for this sample I'll be creating a tapered sleeve. This sleeve is worked from bottom up, so we will be doing some increasing as we go after we complete the color work portion. So I'm going to start by working the ribbing in rows. We'll join, and then we'll start working those granny stitches in the round. And the reason why is I do not want to come back and seam later. I just don't. I know you don't really want to either. By working these in the round and turning after every single round, it creates a one-piece sleeve, so we don't have to come back and do a seam that, you know, maybe will not look as well as doing it this way. So we will be working these in the round, but I promise it's not complicated. So let's get started. Now for the sleeve ribbing, it will be very similar to the ribbing we did on the bottom part of the cardigan. We're just not doing it as wide. We're doing a 7-stitch ribbing instead of a 9, but the same instructions apply. And for the size that we're making today, for the size small, I did 36 rows of ribbing. Now in the larger sizes, we added a little bit more to the ribbing, but this applies to a few of the sizes. Now we're just going to go ahead and join this ribbing by slip stitching through the stitches. So we're going to go through our current row. We're going to chain 1 on the end, and we're going to go through our current row through the back loop only, and then our very first row through the back loop only, and then slip stitch to join those together. And we're going to do that for all 7 stitches across. Now sometimes I prefer the opposite side of this to show than the side that has the slip stitches, so I'll simply flip it, and that way the back side of it shows, but I kind of like that one a little bit better. I know it's picky. It's really up to you which side you like better when it comes to joining those edges. And now we are going to be working in the rounds. So this is where we're going to, in a minute, go to our granny stitches. But before we do that, it's really nice. We simply chain 1, and then we slip stitch 1 slip stitch per edge. And I know we've done this before in this pattern, all the way around. I like the look of that by having a nice line between starting those granny stitches. So I'm just going to slip stitch 1 stitch per row all the way around. So that will be 36 stitches. Now after working all the way around, we're going to slip stitch to that very first stitch in the round and then turn our work. So this very first round, we're going to be having the wrong side facing us, and this round, when we turn it again, the right side will be facing out. But we're going to be working it from the wrong side of our sleeve facing us. And I like to work it in the front loops only, and that way it leaves a nice line along the edge of that cuff. So going into the very first stitch of the round, we are going to do a stacked single crochet and then 2 double crochets into that same stitch. And now you don't have to work in the front loops only, it's completely up to you. I just like to. Then we're going to skip the next 2 stitches and 3 double crochet into the next. And we're going to work that all the way around, working 3 double crochets and then skipping 2 stitches. Now, as we get to the end of round 1, we'll want to join with our new color because we're going to be starting with our color B. But since we have the wrong side facing, we're going to leave our tail end on the side that's facing us. And we're going to be working this as if we were doing color work and we were keeping all of our floats or tail ends on the wrong side. So then we'll insert our hook into that very first stitch, that very first stack single crochet, and we're going to yarn over with that new color and pull through. And then we can pull our ends to get those tightened down. We can go ahead and fasten off color A. We're not going to use it for a little while. It's going to be a long enough stretch you wouldn't want to carry it up. So we're just going to go ahead and fasten it off, and we can tuck in our ends to the center of this. Once we have joined, since we're working in the round, but we are turning. So we're going to turn our work. And now once again, this is the right side facing us. And we're going to start by working this very first space with a stacked single crochet. And then we're going to do 2 double crochet stitches into that same space, but we will be changing colors before we move on to the next group of 3 double crochets. So we will want to grab our color C, and on that very last stitch, we're going to yarn over with our new color. And now in this next space, we are going to be working the color C for 3 double crochets. And then we're going to switch back to our color B, and we're going to be alternating those colors all the way around. This is the same chart that we used for the pocket, but the pocket one was done in rows, not in rounds. So it's worked a little bit different, but the look of it ends up being the same. So I'm going to work this all the way around for round 2 until I get to the end, and we'll talk about turning again for round 3. Now for round 3, we will still be doing our color C. So we can simply go and slip stitch to join to the first stitch of this round, and then we're going to turn our work. And you can fasten off the color B. I know we're going to have a few ends here to weave in later, but I find it actually goes pretty quick. It's not too bad, and it's worth this granny color work. So now we are going to turn our work. And working from the wrong side, we're going to start into this very first space with a stacked single crochet and then 2 double crochets into the same space. And then we're just going to keep working this color all the way around. Now for round 4 of this, we're starting with our same color C. So we can go ahead and join with a slip stitch. And then we're going to turn our work, and the very first stitch of this round is also done in C, so we can go ahead and do that stacked single crochet and then 2 double crochets in the same. And then now is where we are going to bring in our color D, and we're going to work that around, changing colors every other space until we get back to the beginning of this round. Now at the end of round 4, we are going to switch back to our color C before finishing this off, and we can go ahead and join with a slip stitch. And for the next 2 rounds, we're actually doing repeats. So for round 5, we're going to repeat round 3, and for round 6, we're going to repeat round 2, and then I'm going to come on back because it's at round 7, we're going to start talking about how to increase the sleeve so that it tapers. Now at the end of round 6, we are changing back to that color A, and we can go ahead and fasten off all our other colors. So color B and color C. Now you can go ahead and weave these ends in now, or you can just simply tuck them to weave them in later. And we're going to turn our work, and this is where we are starting round 7. Now we're going to be doing some increasing here at the spot where we join, because that's going to help us taper the sleeve. Now when it comes to granny stitches, there's actually 2 rounds that contribute to an increase. This is how they are going to go. So this is going to be increase round 1. We're going to start by doing a stacked single crochet, and then we are going to do 3 double crochets in that same spot. So we'll have a total of 4 stitches in the first space. And now for the rest of the round, we are simply going to work 3 double crochets in each space around. At the end of round 7, we're going to join to the top of that stacked single crochet, and then we're going to turn our work, and in this very first space we will do a stacked single crochet and then 2 double crochets, and we are going to work in pattern, working 3 double crochets into each space until we get to this space where we have 4 double crochets, and I'll show you what we do there. Now for this increase round 2, when we get to the space where there are 4 stitches, we're simply going to work 3 double crochets right in the center. So 2 stitches on each side of your hook. We're going to work right in the center of those 4 and do 3 double crochets. And that's the end of the increase round 2. We can join and turn our work. Now, depending on what size you're doing, the increase will do increments in different ways, because it just depends on what we're trying to get that measurement to be at the underarm. Now, for size small, what we'll be doing is we'll be working the 2 increase rounds and then 2 rounds without increasing, so just working in pattern, and we'll do that 8 times. So what I like to do is I like to grab one of my stitch markers, and I will mark where I did those 4 double crochets. And for the size that I'm working, I know that once I get 4 rounds, including the one I marked, then on the next one, I'm going to need to start that increase round 1, because I'm going to do the increase round 1, the increase round 2, 2 more rounds that are simply not doing any increasing, just working in pattern, and then I'll start that pattern again. And so sometimes moving a stitch marker up to remind you when you last increased is a good idea. It just helps me keep track of it. So I will be working that increasing segment 8 times, and then I'm going to work 7 more rounds after I do those just in pattern. And that will get me to a total of 45 rounds, including this colorwork panel, for the sleeve. And that's a total of 60 stitches for the size small. And that's what will get us to this larger sleeve that is tapered. This is where we will end when we've gotten to this point, and this is going to attach to our cardigan quite well. And we've got that beautiful color work. So I'm just going to keep working this up so it works up the same as the first one I did, and then I'll have the sleeves done. Until our ribbing here, it works all the way around back to where we started with those slip stitches on the other side. Now when it comes to attaching the sleeve, and I've already attached one on this side, what you'll want to do is line up the sleeve with the arm opening and grab some stitch markers. I find it much easier if you pin at least 4 stitch markers around. 6 is even better to seam this, because then as you go, things aren't shifting and they are staying in place, and then it stays an even stitching all the way around where we don't have, you know, some areas pulling and some areas not. So I'll usually measure or like set up top and bottom stitch markers, and then I'll do the ones between. And it really just makes life a little bit easier when it comes to seaming this and making sure that it seams up nice and even. And then we're simply going to take our yarn needle and go back and forth. You can do a whip stitch. I like to just go back and forth between my stitches and seam it to the body. And that really completes the bulk of this. The last thing we have is the pockets, but at this point we have a beautiful cardigan that we can try on. And then I'll come back and show you how to do the pockets. Now I'm just going back and forth. I've zoomed in so that you can see this, and I'm just catching fabric as I go. This is kind of similar to a whip stitch, but we're not going on top of the fabric. I'm just staying within the fabric, going back and forth. This really isn't difficult to do. You just want to make sure, once again, that your sides are lining up and everything's looking nice and clean as we go, that we're not getting puckering on one side, and that we seam evenly around. And now the final touch for this pattern is to stitch on these pockets. Now what I did is I put it on and I made sure I liked where the pocket was, and I pinned it in place. And now I'm going to evenly stitch all the way around the bottom 3 sides of the pocket, of course leaving the top open so I can throw in my cell phone. So I'm just going to take my yarn needle and we're going to stitch those pockets to the body. Now for the pockets, I do actually enjoy using a whip stitch, going through the outside loop of that slip stitch, and then grabbing some of the yarn from the body and pulling through, and then doing that again. So outside loop, yarn from the body, whip stitch that together. And I'll do that all the way around the edges of this pocket. Now the last thing you'll need to do is double check everything to make sure that you've woven in all of your ends. And then we are finished with this gorgeous cozy cardigan. I cannot wait to wear this all season long. It's perfect for at home when lounging on the couch, but it's also great to throw on if you want to go to, say, the coffee shop or a movie with a friend. I always have to take something to the movies that's nice and warm because it's so cold. This one is perfect for date nights and everything else in between. I really hope you enjoyed making this cardigan. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and come back for more fun projects soon.